We'll call this meeting of the Oversight Committee for the City of Glendale to order. And may I have a roll call, please?
Here.
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 Here. Here. Next item. May I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Any corrections or delusions? Seeing none, roll call for the minutes.
Board members of Carrion, Berry, yes. Nakasone,
Yes.
Shoa,
Aye.
Sheehan,
Yes.
Steger, Chair Raggio.
Yes, minutes are approved. Information items. Do we have anything today?
Under action items, there are items.
No, I mean under information.
I would defer to the executive directors.
All right.
No, we
next item then.
Under action items, F4A is Director of Economic Development regarding second revision to the agency's long-range property management plan. A1 is a resolution revising the LRPMP plan.
Bill?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Oversight Board, if this looks familiar, like you've seen it before, it's because you have. We are back with a second revision to our long-range property management plan. If you recall, we had asked you to adopt a plan. You did. We sent it to the Department of Finance. They reviewed it. On their initial review, they asked us to make some revisions and indicated that that would be sufficient for approval. We came back to you and asked you to make those revisions. You approved that. We sent it up again, and on their final pass at that, they had yet more revisions to make, these a little bit more significant. There are really 4 properties in play here. Under the law, we need to characterize each property in one of 4 different categories: government use, retained to fulfill an obligation, retained for future development, subject to a compensation agreement, or outright sell. 3 of the properties, or actually all 4 of the properties, we had listed to retain to fulfill an obligation. 3 of those were leases that were running sometime into the future. Various times, in fact, one of the properties is a 99-year lease. The department did not recognize that as an obligation. While we disagreed with them, this is, I would say, the expedient way to do this. We could either sue them and hold up our plan, or go in a different direction. So we have indeed done that with several of the properties that we think gets us to the same place anyway. The Alex Theater is the first property that we would ask to retain for future development. That needs to have a compensation agreement with the other entities. It needs to be listed in a plan. We think that it has been. We'll characterize it this way. We'll get approval of our plan, and then we'll go and negotiate those compensation agreements. If we're unable to do that, you'll see this plan again, and it will have some other designation, most likely to sell the property. But we think that we'd like to be able to talk to our tax and entity partners about retaining that property in the city and continue to operate it as a regional performing arts center. The Museum of Neon Art, same there. We would like to have the city retain it. It has been indicated in plans, redevelopment plans, and we would negotiate compensation agreements for those. The Lemley Lofts project, we had kind of combined this with to fulfill an obligation along with an amended and restated disposition and development agreement that you all approved. You made findings that it increased revenue, the project increased revenue, decreased liabilities, and was in the best interest of the taxing entities to do that project. The department disagreed with you and said that we don't find that it reduces liabilities, and therefore they rejected that. So we have gone back to, we're going to restructure that a little bit It's the same dollars. We've gone back to the original obligation, which they do recognize, that puts the property in $1.5 million. The City of Glendale, instead of entering into a tax sharing agreement with the taxing entities, will pay those dollars outside of the redevelopment process. The department is satisfied with that. Finally, there is a lease with Caruso Affiliated for the ground under the parking structure at the Americana at Brand. It's a 99-year lease with a rent of $1 a year. So that property, there is no other category to put it in other than to sell it. The department has indicated that we can direct that sale to the most logical buyer, which is Caruso Affiliated. So we will list it for sale, and then we'll approach Caruso Affiliated. So those are the changes. They've been highlighted in a rose color in your packet. Yellow is from the previous revision. We're recommending your approval and hope that you would adopt that. If you do, we'll send this to the Department of Finance. They have seen the plan. They know of the changes that we're going to make, and they've indicated that they will do an expedited review of this. So we hope to have an approval next week.
If yellow represents the past and red represents the present, what colors do you have in mind for the future?
Well, there's a whole rainbow, and I hope that we're just at these colors and we get approval. But you know, Mr. Chairman, in all honesty, if for some reason we're unable to enter into one of those agreements, we will be back before you for a revision to the plan.
Yeah, I understand that. Questions?
Phil, are you saying that you're going to enter into compensation agreements with the taxing entities for the two properties that you want to retain?
Or, yes.
If you sell them, or are you going to, at the time of sale, or automatically we're going to have compensation agreements?
Well, those two properties, what we want to have happen is that the City of Glendale retain them. So
yes.
Title would transfer from the Successor Agency to the city. That can only happen if we enter into a compensation agreement. For those two properties, we'll be going back to your various staffs or you and talk about those compensation agreements. I will tell you that the department has said that's between you and the taxing entities. We won't look at them. We're going to rely on the taxing entities to police that. It can be for whatever amount you all agree on, just so long as the successor agency is out of the property owning business.
So when you say that the amount can be whatever we agree on, why might a taxing entity agree to a dollar, a single U.S. dollar, and what would be the benefit and their interest doing that, as opposed to if they say no, it's the full fair market value, then what happens if between those two extremes, those two poles?
Take the Alex Theater, for instance. I think each one of the bodies that you represent has an interest in seeing that remain a regional performing arts center. That theater operates right now at a loss that the City of Glendale subsidizes. There is a plan to get us closer to a wash, but that may not happen. If we were unable to come to some kind of arrangement to continue that as a performing arts center, we would have to sell the property because they've already indicated we cannot have it for government use. They would reject that. We would have to sell the property. And while we have limitations on what can be used, that property can be used for, it could be put to some of the use other than a regional performing arts center.
But to the extent that it's a regional performing arts center and it's subsidized by a public agency, that would speak to why the taxing entities would say, fine, city, basically take it for $1, and it's your property, it's your white elephant to some degree, although we all enjoy the performances that take place there. What if one of the taxing entities said then, no, I want my fair market value share out of it, whatever that might end up being? Would we sell the Alex Theater to the school district or to the county or to the college?
We could do just about anything, Mr. Ochoa, unless my lawyer kicks me under the table. But let's say that one of the taxing entities said, no, I want my share. We could arrange an agreement where we all pay that amount, whatever that amount would have been, were we to sell it on the open market. But again, I would suggest, or I'll represent, that each one of the taxing entities represented here has an interest in that. It is a regional performing arts center that draws from the entire county. The school uses it for I should say the school benefits from it, from the educational programs that Glendale Arts performs. They operate the box office for the college. So there's something that each of us has, in this property that I imagine we'd like to see remain. And so under those circumstances, I could see and would hope that the taxing agencies say, it is better for us to leave this icon project, historical building, as a regional performing arts center and have the city continue to operate it to all of our benefit.
Question answered.
Yes, sir.
Any further questions?
I do. But if you can't get agreement, then what's going to happen?
Again, in the example, let's take the college. I think the college has, let's say, 1%. If everybody else said, yes, city, you go ahead and retain it for $1,
right,
and the college said, no, by God, let's sell it because I want my share. Well, the other taxing entities could say, all right, let's get the appraised value. It's $100. You get 1% of that, so here's $1. We'll give you $1, and there's your share. And then the rest can enter into the agreement, and title would transfer. Now, if it's the school, or I'm sorry, the college district, because the percentage is relatively low,
right,
maybe we can do that. If it's the county that says no way, no how,
right,
that's a different proposition because the county takes the lion's share.
So if the county came back and said, we want the Mike Antonovich Performing Arts Center to be there at the Alex, they could enforce upon the other taxing entities, and this specifically the city, to sell the property for the fair market value to the county to be used as a performing arts center.
Well, they could compel the sale. The successor agency can direct that sale.
Okay.
So you might have a stalemate where say, okay, we'll sell it, but we're going to sell it to Scott Ochoa and have it the Scott Ochoa Performing Arts
As long as it's not the Scott Ochoa Memorial Performing Arts Center.
and if that's the case, it may be the Scott Ochoa Memorial. But I can't speak for the other taxing agencies, but there has been support from all of them to the Alex Theater over the years. And so while we have not approached each of you, and we're a little bit ahead of the horse, we would hope that there's that interest in maintaining that facility.
But you could only do that if you had the concurrence of the successor agency, isn't that right? They would have to have a 3-2 vote at the least as to whether it's going to be sold or not. Since their interest happens to be the principal interest in it.
What would ultimately happen is, let's say that we couldn't come to agreement, we may go back to the successor agency and say, we want to list this for sale. And let's say it's a 3-2 vote to sell it. Well, then they're going to give us some direction as to where do we sell that? And they could direct that. I imagine that the Oversight Board would have to weigh in on that and say yes and recommend it up to the Department of Finance. In that instance, if we're selling property, the Department of Finance does have review of that purchase and sale agreement to ensure that it's fair market value and reasonable value.
So have you entered into any dialogue with the county?
None. This has all come up in the last 10 days. And we've been scrambling to try and revise this plan. What the classifications that we put it in really buy us some time. We can get the plan approved and then go to each of the taxing agencies and say, here's what we've indicated. We would like to enter into compensation agreements. But much like we did before under the Lemley project, I'm going to go to 19 different entities and try and herd everybody together to come to some agreement, which is a bit of a challenge. Now, fortunately, the 5 of you you represent the majority of that group.
7.
Well, I mean, it's really the county, the school district, the college district. The county if the supervisors want to do it, all of their agencies are going to go along.
Quick question on, right now the city helps subsidize the Alex, right? Or the successor agency, and that happens as an enforceable obligation, right? So if we were to sell it, does that take the successor agency off the hook for that subsidy? So if you buy it, you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. If you want the Alex Theater, you get it operating at a loss in real terms because the successor agency no longer subsidizes it because it's a transfer of ownership?
The owner would take on that obligation.
Okay.
That obligation, though, only lasts for another year. In fact, I think our next ROPS is the last payment. So, however, if there is the obligation to operate it as a performing arts center, we know that that operates at a loss right now. So somebody's going to have to come in and say, I'm willing to lose some money to buy this property.
Where do I sign?
And so if you enter into negotiations with the taxing entities, how much, is there a time frame or a time limit that you're up against?
There really isn't. There's words like expeditiously and sooner rather than later, and I think they even gave us a 12-month. If property is going to be sold, it has to be sold within 12 months of the last obligation payment. So it's a little bit loose, but it would be my recommendation that we immediately enter into negotiations, try and resolve it, so that if in fact Glendale Arts is going to continue to manage the theater, they can start to do some fundraising. Right now, with the property in limbo, it's very difficult for them to go to a contributor or a foundation and say, would you contribute to the Alex Theater? Well, who owns it? We're not sure yet. So to have that resolved sooner than later would be, I think, in the best interest of all of us.
But the vote today somewhat clarifies that issue for them, doesn't it?
Yes.
So that means that if they have any ways of raising money, they can get started in the reasonable future.
For those that are willing to go along with them, that yes, the city and the county and the school district and the college district, they're all going to want to maintain this as a regional performing arts center. I should note that Senator Liu has offered, and in fact I believe her staff will continue discussion with the Department of Finance that would allow this property to stay as government use, in which case it would transfer to the city. If she's successful in those conversations and the department sees this as eligible for government use, we would come back and want to amend this plan and then have it with the city to continue operation as it is.
Yeah.
As I read the proposal, and I'm not against it, but as I read the proposal, it only says the successor agency intends to enter into a compensation agreement. Can we make it a little stronger and say the successor agency shall enter in a compensation agreement with the taxing entity?
In fact, I can't transfer the property. There isn't a title company that would allow me to transfer the property and issue without that compensation agreement in place. The intent is to say, I'm going to go and negotiate that with you. To say shall means I don't have any other choice. Now, if I can't enter into an agreement with you, I come back and I revise the plan to do something else. Shall means I continue to negotiate until somebody cries uncle. And this was the language that was recommended by the Department of Finance. What they're seeing is, and we intend to do this.
Further questions?
Nope. Like to make a motion to support?
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Board members: Zakarian, Berry.
Yes.
Nakasone.
Yes.
Ochoa.
Aye.
Sheehan.
Yes.
Seeger.
Yes.
Chair here.
Yes. Next item?
Next item is oral communications, and there were no cards submitted, Mr. Chair.
Board members have any staff, any comments? And we have no need for a closed session, do we? Any new business? Entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved. Second.
We are adjourned. And thank you again.
Good to see you, sir.